Egypt is making bold moves, pushing for global cooperation to combat everything from the climate crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic. The nation links Africa with the Middle East. Last year, Egypt became the first country in the region to issue green bonds worth $750 million. Egypt has already been chosen to host next year's COP27 UN climate conference. The nation is also blazing a trail regarding the pandemic. It also organized a global forum of policymakers and economists from around the world to discuss pandemic recovery. Time now for the exchange and a deeper look at the vehicle Egypt is using to drive the global exchange of ideas and action. The Egypt International Cooperation Forum just convened last month for the first time. With me now to discuss is Rania Al-Mashat, author and Egypt's Minister for International Cooperation. Minister, great to see you again. I was in Cairo with you beginning of last month, and this is the forum that you created to increase international cooperation. But I want to take a step back here, because when we talk about dealing with global problems by cooperating with each other, what we've seen through the pandemic is the richer, more resourceful countries have shown their true cards, specifically when it comes to vaccine procurement. Now that you're engaged in this conversation, are the big players listening, and what role does Egypt want to play?
Well, hi, Eleni. Nice to see you again. Of course, we just finished the IMF and World Bank annual meetings over the weekend, and the calls from the Development Committee and the G24 was, of course, the need for equitable distribution of vaccines. And that is, we are not safe, nobody's safe until everybody's safe. So I think there's plenty of effort from multinational development banks in that context. And everybody's trying to roll out the vaccines to the population, and that's something that we are doing very forcefully as well.
All right, let's talk about your book that you've recently published, and you set about methodologies. You talk about how countries can cooperate with each other. You talk about how the private sector can play a role. Tell me about who should be reading this. And when we talk about international cooperation, you're talking about transforming the way we do things to solve global problems. We mustn't take our eyes off the ball when it comes to sustainable development goals.
Yes, well, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, there was this discussion that every country is on its own. But as we moved forward, it was very clear that more cooperation was needed, a cooperation that had to be country-owned, and that is something that we explicitly describe in our principles of economic diplomacy. We need stakeholder engagement. When we say stakeholder, it's the government, it's the private sector, civil society, and the international development partners. How we do this, and these are lessons that we've learned during 2020, to be more effective with respect to collating our national goals, but at the same time, making sure that we are adding to the global agenda. You mentioned SDGs. This was the common denominator agreed across countries in 2015, and everyone is working very forcefully towards 2030. In our case, the principles that we laid out, and this is what's described in the book, is to have country-led multi-stakeholder platforms so that we have complementarity across the different actors and the stakeholders, and that has been very evident during the pandemic. The second is to actually map the financing to the SDGs to be able to identify gaps and try and expedite the agenda going forward. And third, trying to have a common narrative to create advocates around the importance of SDGs and also the financing towards them. And that's where we have our 3 Ps, people at the core, and projects in action, and purpose as the driver. So these were the 3 principles that define our international cooperation framework. And it also calls for stakeholder engagement for moving forward. When you say who should read this, it's really the international development world. And we are planning, and one of the outcomes of the ICF was engaging in South-South cooperation, where these principles can also be replicated in other countries that are working with the international community for achieving the SDGs.
Yeah. Okay, so, the world agrees that we have fundamental problems that affect everyone. Climate is one of those. We know what the vulnerabilities are, and now the pandemic links us all together. But how do you move from just having a conversation that we know we need to work together to actually actioning that, ensuring that you have developmental assistance, you have grants, you have FDI, and you have money flowing to deal with these global issues, and people to agree, importantly?
Eleni, I think one of the silver linings in the pandemic was the acceleration in the climate agenda. Everybody's talking about a recovery, not just that, but a green recovery. The green recovery requires collective action and also requires a lot of financing. And that's why one of the key themes during the ICF, and it's also mentioned explicitly in our communique, and I hope everybody takes a look at that, because it is a description of the actions that we will be working together with the international community and countries in the continent. And one of the key items in the ICF communique is around climate. And your report just before our discussion here was showing that Africa only contributes 4% to what we see globally. Nonetheless, there's a huge implication and repercussion. It's not just an environmental issue, it's a developmental issue with implications on youth, on women, also on economic activity going forward. And that's why there has to be a holistic approach to it. Financing is extremely important. Innovative financing tools for the green recovery is something that we are putting very closely in our national agenda and trying to collate efforts around it, as happened in issuing the green bond that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And there's very little money can't fix, right? We can throw money at some of these problems and we can find a way forward. I have to ask you about COP27. I've been hosting so many climate change panels during Expo. Everyone's talking about Egypt. What can you give me some insight and clarity on whether you're hosting?
You also moderated our climate session during ICF. And yes, of course, one of the key items for us is going to be the collective action in Africa to be able to, meet this climate challenge. Again, COP27 and its messages will really depend on the outcome of COP26. So all eyes are on the next, convention in Scotland, and out of that will be the design of what we go forward for COP27.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Minister. I wish you all the best, and thanks for doing all the hard work in getting Africa on the map. Great to see you. Thank you so much for watching.